What's up, everybody? Welcome to a live streamed edition of Drew Dinkmeyer chasing $300,000 first place prize on Drafters Fantasy in the $2 million Best Ball Championship over at Drafters Fantasy. You've seen the likes of Adam Levitan, Justin Herzig, Evan Silva, Mike Leone, Sam Sherman. You've seen them all draft. Seen them draft as teams. You've seen how well that goes sometimes. So we're going solo tonight. Just you and me, the viewers here, drafting a couple best ball teams, hanging out amongst friends, taking your questions on the summer of best ball as we come to a close. So let's get in the draft room. Going to let the people know in our Discord here that we are hopping in. Fast draft for drafters. Share the screen here so everybody can see what we got going on the draft. And we're waiting for 9 more of our friends to join, and then we'll get going. So how's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for joining me. This will be draft number 713 for me of the draft season. So either an expert or a man about to go broke, one of the two. We'll find out 4 or 5 months or so. But if you have any questions about best ball season, about my draft exposures, about what I've been targeting, how I've been going about the contest, what I've been attacking, feel free to chime in on chat. While we're all here waiting for this draft to fill, I'd be remiss if I didn't show the QR code. It's draft kit time, baby. The 2023 draft kit, rankings, tiers, late round targets, fades, lots of content. So much content that our header is overflowing on establishedrun.com. Make sure to scan that QR code to get access to purchase that draft kit and get yourself ready for draft season this weekend. For all of you out there drafting your season-long teams, I will be looking forward to it. JT exposure is one of the questions that I see. Let me put up my handy exposure tab here. This is going to be a sad one for me. Jonathan Taylor, I believe I'm at 8%, 7.8% on JT. So Scott Vetter asking about JT exposure, 7.8%. A little bit frustrating. I have most of my exposure, honestly, in a few high stakes drafts on DraftKings that I got him in like the 4th round when I bought the first dip. But I don't know that I'll be buying much of this next dip. I think we're in a tough spot now with JT the rest of the way. So Corey Davis exposure, another question on exposure. Corey Davis, I avoided the whirlwind to some extent. I've got 5% Corey Davis. So 5% Corey Davis and 5% Russell Gage. Those are both mostly on 20-round draft platforms, DraftKings, drafters, so on and so forth. So, the 20-round drafts, you can have misses in the 18, 19, 20th round, and it's not that big of a deal. 5% exposure, I can swallow that. I'll be all right. Hopefully nobody got too overexposed on some of those late round picks. The Davis one is frustrating because, man, finally getting to play with a pretty good quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and you'd think the opportunity's out there. I mean, they're talking about Randall Cobb as the starting slot receiver now in the wake of Corey Davis's retirement. Looked like a great opportunity for Corey Davis to be part of a pretty prolific offense. So disappointing outcome there. But guy's got to do what's best for him and his family. Happy to see people walking away from football with their health too, because it's a dangerous sport out there. All right, so we're still waiting. If you guys want to join us, reminder on drafters, we've got the promo code going, promo code ETR on drafters will get you 100% deposit bonus up to $100. So you can deposit your $100 over there, get another $100 right back in the account to work with for bonus purposes, and draft a few teams. Get your shot at the $2 million here, $300,000 to first. Pretty good deal. So support our good friends at Drafters. Drafters in the chat saying one more spot. We've got one more top in here with me. This will be my 57th draft on Drafters, I believe. Been trying to kind of get there towards the end here. Trying to get probably into the 80s. I don't know if I don't think I'll be able to max it. I don't think I'm going to have that kind of time, but hopefully getting into the 80s on drafters. Make a nice solid push. Good format, good tournament, different than some of the other best ball structures around here. We'll talk through it as we're going through the draft. But for those who are unfamiliar on drafters, there's no playoffs. So you don't have to worry about memorizing week 17 matchups, or week 16 correlation, or week 15 correlations. You're just building the best team throughout the whole year. All that matters is total points scored. The $300,000 winner will be the best team drafted on the site. This is the only site in best ball season that can say that. The best team drafted on the site will win the most money by far. On other sites, it's the best team at the right time that will win the most money. But on drafters, it's the best team for the whole season that wins it. So cool format, a little bit different. Still looking for one more here to fill us out and get us going. All right, we're getting ready to fire up here. How many drafts at once is your comfort zone? Scott asking the question. My comfort zone is 2 to 3. Beyond 2 to 3, I get a little bit shaken up on anything more than that. So my comfort zone is 2 to 3. Okay, let's get in here. Oh, I missed it. We've already been going. I've missed it. We were auto drafted. Eckler Waddle's a fine start though, so totally fine with that. Comfortable. I missed the notification on going live, so apologies to the first 2 round picks. We'll do another draft after this as well to start out. That 8 spot I've been getting a lot of. I'm actually quite exposed to Eckler, so he's one of my higher exposure players of the season in the first round, and it's often because he's a guy that slips past where I think he should be valued around the 6th spot. He slips into that 8, 9, 10 range often, and I just kind of keep scooping him up. So, and at least I didn't get JT. Don't worry, my rankings, we're not going to get JT anywhere. And you can upload your rankings on Drafters. I've got ETR's rankings uploaded in here. So we'll keep going through. But yeah, Eckler is a guy that I'm at, let's see, I think I'm at like 13% on Eckler, which is a big number, 13, 14% on Eckler. So he's going to be one of my higher exposure players this year. A little bit unnerving for a 28-year-old running back coming off of his best season. But I really, really believe strongly in the Chargers offense this year. I think they're going to turn stuff up with Kellen Moore, a lot more pass rate over expectation, play fast. Could hurt Austin Eckler from a dump off perspective, getting fewer of those kind of easy checkdowns if they try to push the ball a little bit more. But I think the success of the offense overall is one that I want to be betting on. And in that first round, we've got Eckler ahead of Kelsey in ranks. So I've got a very limited Kelsey exposure this year. And often people are comfortable letting him slide past Diggs, past Bijan, stuff like that. So you'll see that too. Scott asks, is it easier on drafters to do more since there's not as much correlation? It depends on, at this point, I know all the different correlations like the back of my hand from drafting all off season. So it's not an impediment for me, but certainly you're still trying to learn the different correlations. It's definitely a different feel and probably easier if you haven't memorized all those by this point. All right, so middle round 3 here. We're coming up on pick 32 for me. You see the quarterbacks start to go here. Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen all in the last 3. One of the things that's been a struggle for me during this draft season is I would love to have more Lamar Jackson exposure than I do. I think I'm only like 4 or 5%. But I have a hard time with Lamar getting drafted so close to Josh Allen specifically. Allen often is falling into this like 30, 31 range a lot. And so I have a bigger position on Allen than I do on Lamar. Let's see what we got coming up here. Probably. So this is a situation where you'll see by ADP, Lamar goes in this range pretty frequently, but I end up often trying to wait for this range to get him. And I just haven't gotten him as much as a result. I'm not actively trying to correct that position. One of the other things that's been challenging is the ADP rise for Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman have also made it more challenging to kind of get the double stack that I want. So on the clock here, we're going to go with Debo, another big position player for me this year. Really excited to get the exposure to the San Francisco offense that's so efficient, produces big plays, routinely week in and week out and allows access to big best ball scores as well. It can be frustrating in managed leagues when you have Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. These guys have some underwhelming performances, but in best ball, those scores that you get to count only when they're good really light up the scoreboard. And so I like getting exposure to the San Francisco passing offense in best ball formats a lot. Mad Sox notes, hard to get the Andrews Lamar nowadays. Yeah, it's really tough. I actually was in a draft earlier today where I saw it last till the 3-4 turn and someone passed on it. And I couldn't believe it. They didn't take Lamar. They took Andrews, but not Lamar. And I was like, man, that's such a unique combo to get these days. And somebody passed on. I couldn't believe it. Andrew asks, do you remember when Deebo was where Deebo was ranked in ETR last year when it was a big fade? I think last year we had Deebo round 4-ish, I think round 4 or 5. And he was going in round 2-3, if I remember right. So we ended up having a big fade. But we've generally been okay with Deebo. The year before we were really high on Deebo when the market was really high on Ayuk. And Deebo had the big blowout year. So it's been a good ride for us with Deebo generally. On the way back here tends to be a running back zone. You can see for me, the top 2 of the ranks here are ETN and Mixon, with Breece Hall a little bit behind. I'll probably just take whichever of the 2 running backs falls here. No strong preference. We've got ETN ahead of Mixon. Mixon's got a little bit of a higher ADP. Running backs on really good offenses are often prime targets for me. There's JT round 3. That is interesting. That is interesting. I'm going to get a little mix in. I have a little more ETN on the year, so I'll mix in a little bit of Joe. Would not be taking Jonathan Taylor at pick 40. Apologies, Damien 613 if you're watching, but would not be my kind of pick. But yeah, generally, I really like getting running backs on elite offenses. Running back production is so much built off of opportunity. And these guys who can walk into cheap touchdowns because their wide receivers get interfered with at the 1 or their team is constantly driving and spending time in the red zone are my kind of backs. So we got 2 from 2 offenses that I'm very confident in this year, the Chargers and the Bengals. And most likely that'll keep us out of the running back streets for a little bit here. Most likely. We'll see. Sometimes something falls in the 6th round that I can get into, but we'll see. I'm Uncle Barry asking, did I max BBM yet? I have not. I'm close. I'm at 143, I think. So I've got a few more left. BBMs for me are, fairly easy to draft mobily because they're shorter, 18 rounds versus 20. So I will often, leave them for like when I need to go for a walk or get out or, do something that's not social, but wanting to be out and about as opposed to at my desktop. James asking, how are you adjusting tight end strategy for drafters versus DK or UD? Good question, James. Tight end strategy, I think, is pretty different on the 18 round versus 20 round sites. I still ideally would love to get, exposure to an elite tight end at a good cost if I could in all best ball formats. I think that's one of the keys to winning the high-end tournaments. Now on drafters, I think there's maybe a little bit less pressure on that because we talked about how the difference in the payouts, right? It's the full season long scoring as opposed to the playoff format scoring. So that really big spike week isn't as valuable on drafters as it is on Underdog or DraftKings because the playoff formats. So I like to try to attack the tight end position on the 20 round drafts in bulk by having at least 3, often 4 tight ends. And that'll probably be an approach I take on this draft, just with the structure that we have going early on with 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers. Probably not going to be dipping into tight end for a few rounds at the very least, if not waiting a long time, probably hammering wide receiver for a while. Drafters is full PPR. And it's a site that generally, if I was to describe it, it's kind of like the quality of drafters of Underdog, like sharp best ball players generally on drafters, with the scoring of DraftKings with the format that's unique to them on drafters, which is full season long. So you get a little bit wide receiver heavy in some of these rooms sometimes. So you want to try the best you can kind of stay ahead of that wide receiver avalanche. And I'll probably be a little bit more bulk tight end as opposed to high end tight ends in this draft. And generally on drafters in DK, I would say I'm a little bit more of the weight and draft by bulk tight end than I am once I can get my hands on Mark Andrews. So in this position here, Aaron Jones, top of the board, but already have 2 running backs. I really don't want to fall behind at wide receiver. Our highest ranked wide receiver here is Chris Godwin. It would have been Terry McLaurin if not for the concerns over the turf toe. So I'll take Godwin here. Just add to the wide receiver room. We'll see what these wide receiver heavy teams after me, if they enjoy the Aaron Jones dropping value. But I'll take my shot there with Godwin, who, look, Mike Evans, last year of his contract, possibly a trade candidate. Their wide receiver room is really thin after the Russell Gage injury as well. Trey Palmer's got a decent chance to be the wide receiver 3 early in the season, a late round draft pick. So there's just a ton of target opportunity for Godwin and Evans. And I know the offense gets a lot worse with the absence of Tom Brady and the transition to Baker Mayfield. Obviously, there's a lot of risk in the offense struggling. I don't mind that as much for pass catchers, because if they're really struggling, there's still a lot of volume potentially there. And in best ball, I can piece together some spike weeks with some volume weeks. So I still don't mind Chris Godwin, a very talented player, going in the 5th round. As you can see here, the wide receiver range starts to thin out a little bit. So we'll see what gets back to here at 65. Sometimes you get the falling value of a running back that's interesting to me in some of these situations. But oftentimes I would prefer to have a wide receiver here and start 2 running backs and 4 wide receivers through the first 6 rounds. We talked about the tight end strategy earlier. George Kittle will be at the top of my, but he's not going to be my selection. I'm going to try to keep it to a little bit more of a wide receiver heavy room. I'm going to take Jahan Dotson, who's been soaring up draft boards of late with that injury to Terry McLaurin. Dotson, we have him mostly as like a 7th round pick throughout most of this draft season. And so we've been a little bit behind ADP on him. I'm trying to kind of build in a little bit more exposure. And this is where I've found it a little more comfortable, this mid 6th round area, especially here where Marquise Brown, one of my highest exposure players overall, goes off the board at the 5-6 turn. Sometimes I can get Marquise Brown deep into the 6th or into the early 7th. Dotson has been kind of a comfortable landing spot here. You see Mike Evans go after Dotson. I could have been on the Mike Evans Godwin double stack train, but I'm really not interested in double stacking Baker Mayfield. I'm not interested in making a huge bet on Tampa's offense. So I'm happy to take one, diversify into another offense that opens up another quarterback that I could potentially look for a stack later on as well. All right, as we wait for the action to come back around, we'll take some questions here. Will Kamara be a weekly start in 12-team leagues once he's back? So in 12-team leagues, if you're starting 2 running backs and a flex, will he be a weekly start? I think he'll be kind of right on that border of like someone that you're not always excited to start, but you're fine starting as your flex option or as your running back 2, depending on how you draft, how running back heavy you draft. The reports that we've heard from Saints camp have been good about Alvin Kamara getting his explosiveness back. So that's encouraging. The concern with Kamara is how much PPR value will there be? We saw last year at times him have to compete with others for that 3rd down role. A little bit concerning there. Hopefully that's not the case this year, because the goal line situation is going to be tough on a team that has Jamal Williams, the NFL's touchdown leader last year, has Taysom Hill that they'll run design plays for as well. It's not always going to be Alvin Kamara getting that first shot at the goal line. And so you're going to need that PPR value to kind of be a weekly consistent starter. I think he'll get it this year, but that's ultimately where the fate is gonna draw. Okay. Who is the age model going to take next? You know, I'm keeping it a little bit on the older side with this team just generally. I mean, Dotson's pretty young, but most of these guys, Waddle's pretty young. Most of these guys kind of in the primes of their career. You could say maybe Mixon and Eckler running back years are getting a little bit up there. But yeah, I'm not necessarily just drafting the young guys, or like Leone just drafting the olds. So we'll see what falls. You can see Jerry Jeudy sliding down the draft board. He's an interesting decision for me for a couple things. One, in this drafters contest, every week counts, man, towards the final score. On the flip side, he'd be a fifth wide receiver for me. So it's like, I could probably get away, but the question is, how many weeks is this hamstring injury going to be? And it's one of those things you can't rush back from. You risk re-injury as well. So I'm not super excited to take Jerry Jeudy. This is a range that falling to would be interesting to me, but I might kind of push it to the turn and see what else comes back in this spot. And generally, this is a little bit of a teardrop at wide receiver here, just generally in terms of what we're looking at. Like, you get into Quentin Johnston, Treylon Burks, there goes Trevor Lawrence. That's a little bit late for Trevor Lawrence. The Herbert user takes him as well. I'm going to actually build a little bit of exposure to a player that I've been a little bit late on this year, and I'm looking to get exposure on the full PPR sites specifically. DeAndre Swift. I'm very heavy Kenneth Gainwell. Very heavy Kenneth Gainwell. I built a decent position to Rashad Penny where I'm kind of neutral, but I've had a hard time getting Swift exposure this year. We've had him kind of consistently well behind ADP. Sometimes he started slipping into the high 80s, low 80s in places. I'm pretty comfortable taking him there. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity cost. The upside on Swift, I think, is still really, really high, given the opportunities that the Eagles backfield will get running behind the best offensive line in football. And he was a guy that we were all taking in the end of the first round, beginning of the second round last year. And now he's on a better team with a better offensive line. I understand all the concerns and the question marks. If you'll get the important high value touches, the passing game stuff and the goal line stuff, it looks right now like Kenny Gainwell might have his hands on the 2-minute, 4-minute drill, and Penny might have the goal line hands. So it looks unclear, but the really low exposure that I have to Swift, I need to do some work to get at least some exposure, because I do think he can blow things up. Okay. Coming back around, 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers through 7. I'm going to start to look more wide receiver-ish here. Most likely, I don't have any quarterbacks that are stack worthy here. So I guess I could take Tua, but I might push the wide receiver room here. So Tua is probably not coming back to me. This owner doesn't have Tua here, but I want to push the wide receiver room a little bit more. I'm going to get Sky Moore. There's a really good quote on Sky Moore today from the Chiefs GM, Brett Veach, talking about how Sky Moore is a full-time player. He expects a potential breakout season from Sky Moore. So you see the Tua goes to the Tyreek owner there, which I expected. That's fine. And so I want exposure to that Kansas City passing game. And if we do, one of the things when you're playing on drafters, you're looking for the big breakouts, right? Like, sure, it's good to have some guys that you feel like can get you through week after week after week with consistency. But the winner of the tournament is going to be the person that has the most big breakout seasons from players. So I do try to draft a little bit on the come, meaning I haven't seen the production yet, but I'm willing to kind of fire and hope it gets there. And so adding Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson, I get a little bit of the age model on my side. Treylon Burks goes there at pick 94. I think that's a pretty good pick too. I think there's been some late adjustments to people realizing that the injury that he suffered in training camp wasn't that big of a deal, and he's probably going to be available for week 1. And I think this is kind of the end of a wide receiver tier here, where things get a little bit muddy in the wide receiver spot. Often in this round 9, round 10, I start to look back into the running backs and the quarterbacks for that. Okay, some questions while we wait on things here. Matt asks, what are your thoughts on Marvin Mims post-Jeudy injury? So Marvin Mims, a really good question. Thank you, Matt, for asking it. Man, the pathway is clear, right? It's not just the Jerry Jeudy injury that's going to open up playing time early in the season. It's also Tim Patrick being lost for the season. It's a Vigil lost for the season. They cut Lil Jordan Humphrey and Marquez Callaway. So they only have like 3 wide receivers even on the roster right now. So I think he's probably pretty fairly valued in this 10, 11, 12 range that he started to creep up into. The challenge is if you've been drafting against contests that have been filled throughout the course of the season, some people at the beginning of the year were getting MIMs in like round 15, 16, 17. And so the question is it worth taking someone round 11 when you know others out there have round 15, 16, 17 exposure on them? I think the answer is yes. It's still fine to take them because ultimately those 15, 16, 17 teams, they might have drafted early enough that they have holes elsewhere. If he had moved all the way up to like the 4th or the 5th round, I'd be like, probably a pass for me. It's just too much of a value gap for me to overcome with what those other monster teams might have built. All right. So we are kicking around here in round 9. This is an area that I start to look for running backs, quarterbacks, production. For me, Anthony Richardson would be in this range. He goes off the board first. We'll see what it leaves. Check after me. Only 2 quarterbacks after me on these 4 teams after me. So I'm going to dip into the quarterback bucket here. And I'm going to get Daniel Jones. Old Danny Dimes. Probably maybe my highest exposure quarterback this year. Need to check that. There's some cheap guys that I have a decent bit of as well, but I do not understand why Daniel Jones goes after Anthony Richardson. Personally, I get all the tools that Anthony Richardson has. I think Daniel Jones has a lot of those same tools. I think Daniel Jones has a better coaching staff. I think he has better skill talent around him. I think he's already shown he can be a top 5, top 10 quarterback option in fantasy. So why? Nuclear upside is what people will say, but we've seen what Brian Daboll did with Josh Allen. We saw what Daniel Jones looked like last year in his first year with limited wide receiver help. Why can't Daniel Jones have that kind of ceiling? That's how I think about it. So I'm very in on Daniel Jones this year. One of my highest exposure players on the whole at the quarterback position. All right, a few more picks here coming up. We've got the 1-3-5 build going. In this range, I often see if there's a running back that I'm interested in kind of tacking on here, because this is where they sort of run out. And these wide receivers, sometimes they'll linger back into the 128 range, whereas the running backs don't as much. So I might take a stab at a running back option here. We'll see what comes back to me. And if I do take a stab at running back, it would be a situation where this is now becoming, with all this running back investment, this is becoming a 5, very, very rarely 6 running back team for me. Could also get into the tight end streets. I haven't gotten there yet with Dalton Kincaid, a big breakout play. But I'm going to take my highest exposure player here. Highest exposure player on the season. I'm taking him now about 4 rounds earlier than I was taking him before, but I can't stop. More Jaylen Warren for me. Really think there's a lot of upside there for Jaylen Warren. Already working his way into a timeshare with Najee Harris. So has some standalone value, even playing alongside Najee Harris. And if something happens where he overtakes the role, big playability, passing game chops. Really like this running back room I've put together, and will allow me to avoid a lot of the late round running backs that get a little dart throwy at this time of the year. All right. While we wait for the draft to come back to us, let's see what other questions we have here. Jake asked, was Mixon the clear pick for you at 41? He was not a clear pick for me. Our rankings had Mixon and ETN really close. I just chose Mixon because I have a little bit less exposure to Mixon at this point. I have a little more exposure to ETN, so just kind of managing portfolio exposures there. Me and Lev on the Thelma and Louise GIF with Daniel Jones. We are big Daniel Jones believers. So, maybe the social media team will make that happen for you, James. But yeah, I'm a big Daniel Jones guy this year. I will look up the exposure now to satisfy the inquisitiveness that I have. 14.2% on Daniel Jones. My highest exposure quarterback is actually Jimmy Garoppolo on 15.6%, and then Daniel Jones at 14.2%. The Garoppolo thing is more just a result of playing a lot of 20-round drafts where basically been free all offseason. Yeah. And look, Anthony Richardson, it's sexy. Guy's the greatest athlete to ever play the quarterback position based on the draft combine metrics. But there's some legitimate question marks about his ability to throw the ball in their offense's ability to sustain drives. And ultimately, upside comes in touchdowns and scoring in fantasy. Yes, rushing can be a big component of that for quarterbacks, but I think Daniel Jones has just as strong of an upside as Anthony Richardson. He goes a little bit later this year. Mad Sox knows, good news, you have 25 slot wide receivers to stack him with, Daniel Jones. Yeah, they've cut down a few of those, so it's getting a little bit clearer. But yeah, he's got a lot of late stack options that you can get into. Obviously, the Waller ones early in the draft season were really fun for Daniel Jones because Waller was going in this like 6-7 range. You see Waller is shot all the way up now to, I mean, even like late 5, honestly, is kind of a fall for Waller these days. He's sometimes going even in, the 4 or 5 turn. So yeah. All right, back on the clock. Geno Smith falling here. It's unfortunate. I usually have some Seattle pass catching pieces. It didn't work out this draft the way that I drafted to get any exposure there. So you can see wide receivers starting to thin out pretty quickly as we look through the options. You can see our ranks here compared to KJ Osborne goes. The ranks here compared to where we are, like the ADP on these wide receivers is not great. So let's see what else we got in terms of the draft area that I can get into here. Quarterback situations, nothing that's stackable. Running back, I'm pretty well built out at. We might have to go with a tight end here. I'm going to go Tyler Higbee just to get one tight end on the board. That was a little bit of a sort of pass draft pick. And what I mean by that is I wasn't taking anybody there that I was super excited to build at. It's sort of just saying like, hey, I want to take my wide receiver guys that are targets a little bit closer to their ADP ideally. And in order to do so, I'm going to have addressed the tight end position a little bit earlier. And so Tyler Higbee has a big target share upside with an offense that's largely dependent on Cooper Kupp. And we've seen it happen in the past with Tyler Higbee, not really a clear number 2 pass catcher there. Van Jefferson's going to run the snaps, but hasn't commanded a huge target share in his career. So there is upside for Tyler Higbee, but that was a pick that was more of just a punt the decision a little bit later. I'm not really wanting to take my 5th running back here just yet. I didn't have a quarterback that was a stack that was super intriguing to me. And all the wide receivers I like are well ahead of ADP here. So get the tight end position, just get one in the chamber. I'm going to try to get 3 or 4 on this team and knock that out of the way and give me more time to draft wide receivers in the zone that I'm going to be pretty optimistic on drafting them and making sure that I get them. You can see here running backs are going to these back-end teams that started out wide receiver heavy. This is a good area for them to get some running back exposure. Rashad Penny's draft stock has fallen quite a bit. Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane. I have a huge exposure to the Miami running back situation this year, which I'll talk about in a second after I make this pick, that I feel really, really good about. But those guys I was getting, I mean, Achane's been variance, but somewhere between 10 and 15 or 16. The dip lately was really nice. I took Jaden Reed there. And so that's one where Jaden Reed's ADP is around 152. Maybe he makes it back to me, but this is a lot of wide receivers to come back. And Isaiah Hodgins would have been the stack partner for Daniel Jones. I just like Jaden Reed's upside more than Isaiah Hodgins this year. And so I think I can get another stack partner for Daniel Jones a little bit later, but Hodgins would have been a potential option there as well. I'm just very, very high in Jaden Reed, one of my top 5 exposure plays as well. Okay, let's get back to some of the questions while we're going here. I know a decent amount of VTR are big fans of Madison, especially Silva with him at running back 10. Do you think that offense will be able to produce enough high-value touches for him? For sure. I think the Minnesota offense is a great one to target this year. Their defense still looks pretty shoddy. Kirk Cousins, competent quarterback, if not solid above-average quarterback in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, the league's best wide receiver. They had Jordan Addison. They had TJ Hawkinson at the back end of last year. We really saw their offense take off towards the back end of last year when they had Hawkinson. as well as another threat to kind of keep defenses honest a little bit with Justin Jefferson. Dalvin Cook wasn't particularly great last year from a metric standpoint. You look at, his breakaway run percentage and success rate and different things like that. Not so great. And he still had like 1,100 yards and almost double-digit touchdowns. So I don't think Madison even has to be that great. I think it's just a good offense that you can rely on getting high-value touches out of. And not a lot of competition. I know they brought in I'm blanking on the running back they just brought in, but to compete with Ty Chandler. But I don't think it's a threat to Madison at all. They haven't really been linked. They let go of Cook, and they've been not really linked to any of these other veteran free agent running backs. So I think it's a pretty good situation for Madison. I often draft him in the late 5th, early 6th round. That's usually a decent target for me in that range. How does your draft slot affect your strategy in the mid and late rounds of drafts? I use slot 10 through 12 and having 20 some picks in between. Yeah, that's a good question. I think you just need to be more cognizant of the runs in the room and where they're likely to come from and what you need and where you can get kind of left out to dry. And I try to build overall a little bit more balanced. If you end up in that 10 through 12 spot, sometimes you can end up being a little wide receiver heavy early on, which I'm very comfortable with. But there are some turns here, if you are really wide receiver heavy, that you kind of have to do what like Crazy Train did here, where like back-to-back running backs, just to like get yourself kind of back on schedule. So you just need to be a little bit more aware. And you can see the drafters in this 11-12 range, they had to do that, right? They had to get into that running back run before it got away from them. All right, so we're coming up here. I'm going to be at 152. Aaron Rodgers sliding way past ADP. There are some late stack candidates. The challenge for me with Rodgers is like, if I am taking Aaron Rodgers, I really want Garrett Wilson on that team this year. So I'm probably going to let him go past me, and we'll see what the Rodgers owner or the Wilson owner, if they're interested in kind of taking that shot. You can see running back is starting to dry up a little bit. Still a couple names that I'm pretty comfortable with. Top of the queue still has some tight end options. So if I want to keep digging into tight ends, I certainly can. I think this is a nice area to draft for upside tight end options, honestly. Jameson Williams, a pick that we'll talk about in a second on drafters. Tough pick to make. I'm going to go with an upside tight end pick here. Chig Okonkwo, another one of my most heavily drafted tight ends this season. Running a ton of routes in the preseason, playing all the snaps. Doesn't have a lot of tight end competition on that team, even like blocking tight ends. They don't really have much. The target share certainly got impacted by the signing of DeAndre Hopkins, but I also think that's going to free up a lot of one-on-one options for Chig over the middle. And Tannehill's, been a pretty favorable thrower to the middle of the field in his career. So I'm a pretty confident drafter of Chig Okonkwo this year. And I know he's small. He doesn't have the typical like tight end breakout structure, because you want a big enough tight end that they're going to trust to be on the field to block, but they don't really have anybody else that they trust. So I feel pretty good about Chig being on the field a bunch this year and having the potential to break out. And this is an area where I think there are some breakout candidates at tight end. They've gotten pushed up. Jake Ferguson's gotten pushed up with his performance. Luke Musgrave, another guy that's been pushed up by his performance. I assume he's going to go here to the Jordan Love drafter there, creating a little mini stack. Those guys have been pushed up, and I think this is a good area. Jawan Johnson, another guy that I think is a good area in here to get that upside at tight end. Now, I'm probably not going to double dip from this range. So I'm still a little bit theoretically. Jeff Wilson, a good pick from Winky. We'll talk about him in a second as well. Probably a little bit behind at the wide receiver position, but I'm really tempted. Sam Howell goes. Okay. I was tempted to take Howell there and pair with Dotson and get another upside quarterback stack. It's a little bit frustrating just because, Rodgers is still sitting there and it feels like such a good value to get into Aaron Rodgers. But I'm going to go wide receiver here. and I'm going to get an upside candidate for Daniel Jones as a stack partner with Jalen Hyatt. Not the top wide receiver on my board here. You can see that's DJ Shark, Rondale Moore, those types. But again, if I'm trying to win this seasonal competition, I need a big breakout. If I'm going to get a big breakout from Jalen Hyatt, that is going to be very good for Daniel Jones. So I'm correlating that decision together, and that's honestly not that difficult of a draft pick for me. A couple notes I wanted to make. Jameson Williams, 151. I struggle with what the right price is for him in this specific contest. I get it. I get this price tag on the sites that play tournaments at the end of the year, that you just need to get through, and then he counts at the end of the year, and that matters. He's not playing the first 6 weeks because he's suspended, so you're not getting any counting stats there. Is he really going to be so overwhelmingly dominant in the last 11 games of the season that you have to have him here? I don't know. We haven't seen it. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He hasn't been on the field. There's been some questionable comments from Dan Campbell about the things he needs to learn to do effectively to be on the field. That's a tough one for me, Jameson Williams. And then Winky took Jeff Wilson, who is maybe my second highest exposure running back this year. My second highest at 16.5%. I've been drafting the Dolphins running game all off season like they are not signing anybody else, and I think there's been great value on Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Devin Achane. I don't think people realize how much opportunity the Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan type offense can create for relatively unknown backs. We've seen it with guys like Alf Morris. You go back to Mike Shanahan, and you've seen it with guys like Mike Anderson, CJ Anderson, guys out of nowhere. And with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle forcing safeties to play deep off the line of scrimmage, you're getting light boxes. I love attacking the Miami running back situation. I'm overweight, meaning more than 8%, because 12 teams in a league, 8% would be the flat mark. I'm overweight on all three running backs. I had some sweats there with the JT news. I was not super prepared for JT trade request out of nowhere, but survived it. So feeling good about things right now for the Dolphins running back room. Obviously, these guys get hurt a lot. That's the challenge, and especially in a drafters format where it's not just 1 week you're trying to play for at a specific point of the season. So this is a interesting spot for me here, where we're so far past ADP on Aaron Rodgers, and I can stack him with Hardman if I want, that I'm tempted. But I've got Purdy right here with Debo, and I think I'm just going to go that route. Grab Purdy with Debo and make sure I get the stack. Because if I get Rodgers there and then somebody takes Hardman, then I'm looking at maybe Conklin later, and that's not super exciting. So I'll just take Purdy there, get my stack up with Debo. Got two quarterbacks stacked with two explosive offensive weapons, and starting to feel good about these things on the whole. 2-4-7-2 build. As I alluded to, after getting these four running backs, I was going to take a break from it for a while. We might be heading in the range of getting back in there, but probably still in the wide receiver area right now. Okay, let's see. Quasi says, after looking at the top teams on drafters last year, the last two wide receiver running backs never contributed to total points since they hit on all the players they needed. As a result, my strat this year was a large percentage of builds with top 5 quarterback tight ends and then get second QB tight ends last 2 picks as an attempt to maximize my flex total in earlier picks. Smart or flawed? I think the fact that you're looking at that level of analysis as a starting point is really strong. Just the fact that you're actually taking the time to look through and evaluate what winning teams looked like last year, I think you're putting yourself in a pretty good position there on the whole. Dawson Knox goes, good pick by Winky. He was on my radar for sure. And it makes sense. Makes sense logically to me that generally the teams that are going to win are going to be the ones that find the biggest value and hit on their plays the most. And take Devontae Parker again, 8th wide receiver there. Hit on their plays their most in the middle in the early double-digit rounds. So can't argue with it. I think it's a pretty good take. Now, every year can be different, some years you're going to run into where the 18, 19, 20th round picks, there is a breakout player in there that's someone you needed to have, and that would change the dynamics of those. But I think the overall bet's not a bad one by any means. Okay. Mark noting for the Hoop Heads, NBA Best Ball dropped on Drafters today too. Go get it. We'll have best ball rankings on the NBA side of things. My forte. For those of you who are not accustomed to my content, I do contribute a decent bit to the NFL team, but I am the head of the NBA content and the NBA product over at Established Run. We are working on many of our season-long projections now to hopefully have ready right after the NFL season starts for those of you who are interested in drafting best ball on the NBA side of things out there. 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th rounds here. I've got a 2-4-8-2 build. You can see just in terms of looking at like the approach of my draft, the wide receivers come in waves, right? So I get 4 of my first 6 as wide receivers, 5 of my first 8 picks wide receivers. Then we take a little bit of a break. Then we come back with like 3 out of the last 5 or so, sprinkle in a running back here or there. But 4 running backs in the first 10 rounds is allowing me to take a break from running backs here. I'm counting on these 4 to be my primary scorers most of the season. Sure, I'll probably draft some insurance options here just because you do need depth at the running back position to get through a full season. But the goal ultimately was to, get most of my scores there and then fill out the depth at wide receiver on the back end because, wide receiver, you got to get 3 scores each week. But had a good foundation with those first 4 with Waddle, Debo, Godwin, Dotson, Sky Moore. And then got in after Dotson got into the upside swings at Sky Moore, Reed, Hyatt. And then Devontae Parker, just a guy that I think is undervalued this year. Going to be on the field a bunch for New England. Possibly their wide receiver 1. I know Juju is the guy that's going to be drafted that way, but would it surprise you if Devontae Parker ended up having a better season than Juju? Wouldn't be shocking to me. So I think it's possibly a wide receiver 1 in round 16 for a team is pretty comfortable. Coming back around on drafters, a lot of times on these 20-round drafts, I go back and forth on whether or not a third quarterback is super valuable. In the tournament style drafts where you're competing at the end of the year for big prizes in the tournament, I think having 3 different stacks is really useful. In the season-long component, I kind of think having the extra skill position players is a more useful approach to adding up incremental point value each and every week. But the quarterback position is a big one. So if you suffer an injury at the quarterback position, it's kind of difficult to build it back up from. So debating here whether we're going to build this as a 3 quarterback team, I'm leaning yes that I'm going to. We'll see what comes here. I'm leaning yes because I think I can make this a 5 running back team. I don't need a 6th running back. So if I think of like a baseline build, we're going to take Tannehill here with our Chig stack. So we got 3 stacks there. If I think of my baseline build as 3 quarterbacks, 6 running backs, 8 wide receivers, 3 tight ends as like a baseline build, that's like similar exposure to all positions based on the number of spots you need to fill for each of them, right? Then where I invest early draft capital into in terms of early round picks, I'm probably going to skew down in terms of number of bulk options I need, right? So I might skew down running back after taking 4 through the first 10 and skew up in terms of number of positions, tight end, because I didn't take a tight end until round 11. So might go 4 tight ends here on this type of build. Winky taking Likely. This is another good pick from Winky. It's also stacked with Lamar Jackson, which love. But I think Likely is an interesting pick, more so in the tournament-based drafts than the drafters draft. I mean, you kind of need like an early season injury to Mark Andrews for that to pay off, but he's so cheap. And at the tight end position, there's so few difference makers. We saw him in limited playing time be really impactful last year. I think that's going to lead to occasional spike weeks, and that could be useful in the tournament-based formats. But certainly if an injury happened, he'd be in a really good position to take advantage of things for Baltimore. Okay, so coming up on round 18. And at the top of Kareem Hunt goes there. He was at the top of my board from a running back perspective. We still got some tight end options who are here. But I'm going to take a swing that I've not been taking at all, but I think is a interesting swing for the drafters format at running back. And he's cheap enough now that I'm fine. I have enough solid production here. I'm going to take Zamir White. And the other swings here, if you look, Josh Kelly, I have Eckler. So that's sort of a bet against myself already. Chris Evans, I have Mixon. Fournette, I don't think is an upside swing. I think he's a get me through things if he signs, which we're still waiting. And I have plenty of Leonard Fournette. I do not have a lot of Zamir White, actually. But not a lot of upside swings here. And so for this format where I'm trying to find the big swings, Zamir White's clearly the number 2 behind Josh Jacobs. That wasn't a role that was very valuable last year. But Josh Jacobs, yeah, he signed the tender. These guys that are a little bit upset with their teams and on short-term deals, I do sort of wonder if we're going to start to see running backs not push through injuries as much and different things like that. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but just in case it does, some 200 plus exposure to Zamir White works for me from a draft perspective. So happy to get some Zamir White exposure there. People asking, who is this year's Amon-Ra St. Brown and Josh Jacobs? Everybody's going to look for these guys that, are the mid-round guys that become kind of first-round candidates. It's tough to see, it's tough to see in advance on the year. Obviously, if we felt really confident in who they would be, we'd be drafting them like crazy. But I think in the case of Amon-Ra St. Brown, you got to think about what are the things that worked for him last year. He was a kind of a slot plus receiver that was on an offense that didn't have a lot of target competition, and he was able to kind of rack up a ton of target competition, a ton of targets, and then he expanded with the efficiency. And just kind of looking at these middle rounds of who could be that type of guy that just explodes, but doesn't have a lot of target competition and just explodes on the efficiency side, it's probably going to be a younger player. I don't think it's going to be like Zay Flowers. I think they're going to spread it around enough with Mark Andrews, but viable option. I'm hoping it's Marquise Brown based on my exposures, but their offense probably isn't good enough. It's tough to see the Amon-Ra St. Brown type of breakout play out this year. Godwin, James Kenny notes Godwin. Godwin's got the potential. Slot dominant player. Can command a lot of target share, not a lot of target competition. The question is, can the offense get good enough? With Detroit, we kind of saw it coming with the investments they had made in the offensive line. Kind of saw that starting to come and develop. Not as optimistic on it happening in Tampa Bay with Baker, but yeah, Godwin's an interesting name to think about there. And then Jacobs, this year's Jacobs, it's tough. It's like a guy that's on a, Jacobs was on a team that a lot of people weren't super excited about last year. Tight end has gotten thinned out on this draft. And we just know Taysom Hill in a full PPR format, just not as valuable. I know a lot of people love Taysom Hill, but not as valuable in the full PPR format. We'll take Noah Fant, maybe a late tight end breakout, good athletic profile, good passing game that can generate a lot of red zone opportunities, but it's a little bit of a dream on Noah Fant in terms of trying to get there. Jacobs, I've seen some people. I know Davis Maddock threw out the name Cam Akers. I think that's an interesting name for who could be Josh Jacobs. Not a lot of competition in that backfield, right? Kieran Williams is the main competition. Zach Evans looked like he was barely hanging on for a roster spot, although I think he's a very talented player. The Rams could surprise, right? They've got a good quarterback, a good established vet quarterback. Jake Curl taking my stacks here, taking Slayton and Wandale. It's a shot to the heart, Jake Curl. Not appreciative of that. But yeah, I think Akers has sort of that profile, and we saw it at the end of the last season, right? He was the worst draft pick in all of best ball for the first 12 weeks of the season, and the best draft pick for all best ball for like the playoffs. That won't work here. Not at drafters. Can't get away with that, Cam Akers. Get out of here with that. Guy sneaks teams into the playoffs, does nothing for them all season, and all of a sudden he's the guy you need. None of that here on drafters. Akers is an interesting name. I'm not super overweight Akers. I'm underweight the position actually on Akers, so I'm not drafting as if he is. Swift would be another guy that people could talk into. Another guy that I'm underweight the position on. So these are not the guys that I'm heaviest on. But DeAndre Swift was a guy that was going at the 1-2 turn last year, and he's on a better offense now. He's got more competition. The Eagles, especially with goal line stuff. All right, we'll take 20th round Taysom. 4th tight end. There's the build. So we went a 3-5-8-4. Little bit of an unusual build there. Daniel Jones, Brock Purdy, Ryan Tannehill, all stacked up. The 4 running backs through the first 10 rounds, Eckler, Mixon, Swift, Warren, really relying on Eckler as the workhorse here, and then Mixon, Swift, Warren. Mixon, Swift, great offenses. Warren, explosive player, potentially usurping Najee Harris. We'll see. Wide receiver heavy the first 6 rounds for the first 6 picks. Waddle, Debo, Godwin, Dotson. You'll also see another thing here that you should pay attention to on drafters. Bye week overlap. Look at this. I'm going to have at least 2 quarterbacks every single week. I'm going to have at least 4 running backs available every single week. I'm going to have at least 6 wide receivers available every single week to get me points. Why is that important? Because every week counts. Every week counts on drafters.com. So tight ends, 4 different bye weeks as well. You'd see I had Kate Otten as an option there as a 4th tight end. Sometimes I might choose Kate Otten over Taysom Hill, but not when I have a 5th by week 5 bye week for Noah Fant as well. So yeah. I was asked to review Team 2 at some point earlier in the draft. So Team 2 is wrapping up their draft here. They go Chase, Henry, Mahomes, ETN, Deontay Johnson, then pound wide receivers after Kittle here. Zay Flowers, Elijah Moore, Tony, Mims. They get McKinnon. So they got McKinnon, Tony, Mahomes as the stack there. Pretty good Mahomes build out on the stack side of things. All right, drafters, I got it. That's my team. It's great. Trying to look at Alligator Blood's team, which is a great name, by the way. Shout out to Rounders. Van Jefferson, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Tank Dell, really wide receiver heavy build, which they needed to be after only 1 wide receiver through the first 4 rounds. The running backs here, Henry, Etienne, McKinnon, Gus Edwards, Deion Jackson, Chris Evans, gonna have to piece it together and rely on a lot of Derrick Henry. One thing I will note is when I get, and you can't be super, beggars can't be choosers at the end of the draft, but my anchor running back, I really don't love having running backs who have the same bye week as them as my filler running backs. You only did it once here with Chris Evans, but I'd really like to avoid that. It's one of the most challenging things about drafting Derrick Henry this year. Obviously, age is a concern and whatnot, but a lot of the running backs you look in this late round, Chuba Hubbard, Chris Evans, there's one Tajay Spears. Well, if you're drafting Henry, you're probably not drafting Spears, but they all have these week 7 bye weeks that are a little bit tougher to build around. All right, we're gonna hop in another draft here. We'll do 2 tonight, so we'll hop in another 2 for the price of 1. The very free. Well, I shouldn't say it's not free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So, as a reminder, hit the QR code, baby. Give me a little QR love. 2023 draft kit, rankings, tiers, late round targets, fades, and more. All the content you need to slay your fantasy league mates, take home the crown, avoid doing any embarrassing things for finishing in last place. You won't be anywhere near last place when you scan that QR code. Get that draft kit over Established Run. No such thing as a free lunch. 2 drafts for the price of 2 QR codes. All right, let's get in another one. All right, 10 more to join. I'm not missing the email notification this time. We're starting on time this time. Even though I got auto drafted, pretty nice picks, Eckler and Waddle. We'll take it. I'm not missing it this time. So I'm getting into my email right now, making sure I get that notification. I don't miss it. All right. Some of the questions while we're waiting for this baby to fill. Andrew saying Marquise Brown is this year's Jacobs. Lots of volume. Most people don't want to click him. I will be very happy if that is the case. I have a lot of Marquise Brown. James asking, would you stack Bellinger here as the last tight end? I personally would not. I don't think there's enough volume for Daniel Bellinger. So I do not. I have plenty of Daniel Jones. I don't have any Daniel Bellinger on teams. I'd have to be pretty desperate. It would be a situation where like tight end went nuts, and it's my third tight end, and literally there's no one else. Like you're getting into like the Austin Hooper, Foster Moreau ranges, then I might get into Bellinger. Ozzy asking, is Kyler Murray going to play week 1? Who is the backup? He is not. He's been put on the physically unable to perform list. So he will not be playing week 1. The backup is Clayton Tune, and they just traded for Josh Dobbs, and there's going to be a competition week 1 for who plays. The guy they've had all preseason or the guy they acquired yesterday. Going to be a fun year in Arizona. James notes Dameon Pierce is Josh Jacobs this year. Possible. He's going a little bit higher. So round 5 versus like Jacobs slipped into like round 8. There we go. There's the notification. We're not missing it this time. Also, a thing I like about drafters here, you get this I'm ready to draft button. If all 12 people click it, they just fired it off. You get going. 10 pick here. So no influencer 101 for me. Alligator blood in this one again. Good luck to you. Mad Sox asks, why not Madison as far as a Jacobs type player this year? Could see that. I think the difference between like a Madison and an Akers type situation is I think when I'm thinking of Jacobs, I'm thinking of an offense that people were scared of in a player that had a good, draft pedigree in the past. Madison was not that. He was a late round draft pick, but I think Madison's path to like that type of monster year would be honestly sort of like the Jamal Williams sun running of 1-yard touchdown runs, because he's not at that echelon of a running back prospect. He's a good, solid running back who's going to take advantage of the opportunities that he has in front of him. I think he'll get a lot of those opportunities, but for the nuclear season, I don't know if he's got that kind of skill level to blow out. I think he'd need to run pretty hot. Ozzy has zero interest in Swift. I get it. I don't have a lot of DeAndre Swift, but I will note he has the pedigree to make it hurt for us, Ozzy. I'm a little nervous. Perfect. People popping in. Quasi in the 6th spot. Good to see Quasi at 144. Quasi, you made the mistake of giving away your draft strategy though during the first draft, so we all know what you're doing out here. But good luck to you. All right. We're about to go here. 9 seconds away. Gonna hydrate a little bit. Keep the voice loose, Enjoy your free sponsorship, La Croix. 10 pick is interesting. It's a tough spot to draft out of this year. Because really, like everybody to me from like 9 through 18 feels like a big tier, and you're drafting at the beginning of it. And so it's not a super fun spot to draft out of this year. But we march on. We will do our best. Oh, Quasi's backing down. Large percentage, but not all the drafts, Quasi. I got you. Keep it tight to the vest. Winky, it was good to see you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for drafting with us. Liked a lot of your picks there. I didn't look at the whole team. I apologize. But noticed a few snipes there. So I felt your presence, Winky. Good to see you. All right, this draft is going pretty standard. We get a little bit of a Travis Kelce jump here. So Quasi gets to start with Tyreek Hill. I think that's a good feeling at 6 when you start with Tyreek Hill or Cooper Kupp. I'm not, if Kelce makes me pay this year, Kelce makes me pay this year. And I get it. He's arguably the best receiving tight end to ever play the position. He's playing with arguably the best quarterback of all time, depending on, how you look at things. Probably not a good enough case yet for Mahomes compared to Brady, but, maybe. So maybe they defy the odds and continue burying you into the mid-30s, but I'm going to take my chances this year with Mark Andrews in round 3 over Kelce in round 1, and that's kind of how I'm positioned. So Bijan goes. So this is the tough spot for me. I've ended up taking a lot of Amon-Ra. That is my most comfortable pick here. I will continue to do that on the stream here. If I was looking to diversify exposures a little bit here, I'm a little light AJ Brown compared to the rest of these options, so maybe I'd do that. But for you people, you get the best and only the best, and that's Amon-Ra St. Brown as my selection there. Excuse me. Devontae Adams is atop our ranks, but his ADP makes it so that I'm always going to make him come back to me. I'm not going to draft him at 10 because if I just draft him at 10, I'm just going to have way more Devontae Adams than everybody else in this range. And so I always make him come back to me. And even when he comes back to me, I'm not always pulling the trigger on that. Yeah. Quasi notes liking going CD Pollard there. I think that one's a pretty interesting one in terms of the question of will the team that's the best team overall this year have two players from the same team in the first two rounds? I think it's really tough. So I'd like to separate in this type of format. Well then, Derrick Henry, round 2. We will take some CeeDee Lamb. Now, many of you out there that have been drafting best balls all year long are going, CeeDee, Amon-Ra, week 17 correlation. Doesn't matter here. Not a thing. Doesn't matter here on drafters.com. So, but I do wonder if the CD Pollard combinations in round 1, I've seen a lot of people do that at the 12-13 turn as well. I do wonder if they have enough juice for the overall prize pool during the course of the season. I think in those instances, you really got to make sure you get Dak because you're really betting on like the Cowboys being a totally nuclear offense compared to everybody else. But so I've been splitting them up personally. Baby Gronk, pretty good. Yeah, agreed. No Tua doubles or Burrow doubles from you, I assume. For me, so this is talking about like the amount of investment you're putting in to two guys in the early rounds. And I guess the same, that's probably a good point. I have drafted some Hill Waddle together and but I've been doing that honestly, mostly in the tournament sites, not as much on drafters. I think you really need the like totally nuclear season. You see Quasi does it here with Hill and Waddle. Got to make sure you get Tua for sure. But I don't know. I just think it's going to be hard for two skill players from the same team in the first two rounds to be kind of optimal this year. But you don't need them necessarily to like them specifically just blow it out of the water. You need to hit on the mid-round picks to blow it out of the water. But, to each their own. I draft the teammates more in the tournament format than I do in the drafters format. And I have lots of I don't say I have lots of Tua doubles. I have a few Tua doubles. They've been difficult to navigate. They've been a little bit easier as Waddle's been sliding lately, but a little bit more difficult to navigate. And then the Burrow doubles, I have a decent bit of. Those I do have a decent bit of with Burrow and sliding to the 5th at times. Kaz, do you think the Colts sign a vet back like Hunt or Fournette? I'd be surprised if they didn't at this point, but they're obviously doing some weird things. The whole way they've handled this Jonathan Taylor situation is just very, very strange. Putting him on the physically unable to perform list makes you wonder if they have any intention of actually playing him this year. You have a rookie quarterback back there that you would like to have as much help as possible for them. And you take away his best offensive weapon, and then the other backs you have are very inexperienced. Blitz pickup is something that I'd think of like immediately. Like I want someone there that's helping my quarterback identify the blitzer and maybe help them navigate coverages for the line. So Hunt and Fournette would be guys that would make sense to me on that front. But they haven't gone that route. They haven't looked to do that. So I don't know. They did talk about bringing Kareem Hunt in earlier, that report when he left the Saints, that he was like going to Indy to get a big offer. Didn't really materialize. So I don't know. Coming back around to me here at this 10 spot, we're starting a little bit of separation here for Lamar. So if Lamar falls here, I might be a little, and he's at the top of my queue here. It's Lamar time. Try to build out a Lamar stack. These are a little bit tough. Early in the draft season, these were so easy to get. Lamar, Zay, and Bateman. They were just like perfectly aligned ADP wise. Then Bateman dropped down with the injury. Zay shot up, and now Zay's going in like this range, and Lamar's going in this range, and then Bateman. Maybe you can sneak him to here, but look, 87 and 106 is like a big difference. So you kind of got to take Bateman at 87. So it's a little bit tougher to build these out now, which is why you got to get into Odell, who I've had a huge fade position against most of the season, or you got to get into likely late like Winky did last draft. That I think makes sense as well. But the Lamar builds early in the offseason were super, super fun because you would get them in the 4th, and then you could get Zay and Bateman in like the 9th through 11th, and you're cooking. They were really fun to build. A little bit more challenging now. Brees at the start of 4. An interesting adjustment on trend. We took Mixon last draft. Hopkins at the top of my queue here and the top of the ADP queue, but I have a ton of DeAndre Hopkins this year. So we're going to get a running back. We took Mixon last time. Let's go Travis Etienne this time. We'll mix it up between the two. But yeah, keep firing in questions if you guys got them on literally anything football related, basketball related, draft strategy. The only questions I will not accept is from those drafting against me asking who I'm going to pick with the next pick. I'll not answer those. Anything else is game. As a reminder, we've got a discount going, our promo code going with our friends here at Drafters. So promo code ETR will get you a matching deposit bonus, 100% match up to $100. So deposit $100 on the site, get $100 in bonus bucks that you can enter into this draft as well. 2 tickets for the price of 1. Sounds like a good deal. There's going to be potentially some overlay on this contest, which overlay is a rare thing in the DFS world these days. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what overlay means as a term, it simply means these prize pools are guaranteed. That means the companies have put up all this money, in this case, $2 million that they're going to pay out in prizes. And then they got to go get the entry fees from everybody else. So they put out $2 million as prize pool. They might not get $2 million back in entry fees. And the difference between that is what we call overlay. And that is essentially free money in the pool that you are chasing. So overlay was a huge, huge part of the early years of DFS as these companies tried to grow themselves. Drafters is trying to grow itself now. Overlay is a way that they can bring new customers on the site to try and get the experience and see if they like playing on that site. There's a great opportunity to do so because it's really beneficial to the user to playing contests at overlay. Okay. Jake saying elite onesies should be prioritized on drafters in his opinion. Get it. Think Quasi was on the same side of things. We did not do that last draft, although I'd argue Daniel Jones has the ability to be an elite onesie, but we did not do that last draft. We do that this draft with Lamar Jackson here in the 3rd round. Andrew asks, how do you think the variance in best ball GPPs compares to weekly DFS main slate ones? It's a good question, Andrew. So I would say that it is highly dependent on the type of tournament that you are playing, both in DFS and in best ball. In the case of like this drafters tournament, there's not a lot of variance that's really thrown in, right? It's like normal seasonal variance that's thrown in, but all the prize pool is just the whole year. So it eliminates some of that randomness of when you hit your spike week, right? Because the team that scores the most points for the whole year is the one that wins all the money. That eliminates a lot of variance. It's a pretty good contest. That's what we're drafting here on this drafter stream tonight. But in some of these other tournaments where a big percentage of the prize pool is heavily weighted in 1 or 2 weeks, that adds to the variance level in terms of the percentage of the pool that you're chasing. It's much like playing a milli maker in DFS where the top prize is such a big percentage of the prize pool, and the variance associated with making money on that contest is often associated with, did you run hot enough to finish first or did you not? Not that second place is anything to sneeze at in milli maker, but a lot of these top heavy contests, it's a big difference between first and second. And over time, a lot of the difference in your ROI is simply a point or two that swung in one direction or not. So much like the DFS contest that you enter, I think in best ball, it's a little contest dependent as well in terms of what you're entering and how the variance impacts things. All right, I'll get to more questions in a second here after we get through this turn. You can see some of these other QBs going. A Mahomes-Burrow combination, 2 quarterbacks through 5 rounds on drafters, I personally think is a big, big no-no. So rock the suburbs. Not the way that I would draft things. You really sort of want on drafter, like in a tournament style, maybe you can ping pong that really make a big difference. All right, let's see what we got here. This is an interesting position for me where I think controlling the board matters a little bit. So while Alexander Mattison is my highest rated player here, you look behind me and there's 2 teams with 2 running backs each. And so they're going to probably take wide receivers here. I'm going to take Godwin again. We'll get a little more Godwin exposure. And I'm going to see what they do because a few of the top options here for me are running backs. And if they feel the need to take wide receivers and take wide receivers like well ahead of ADP or whatever, I can just kind of come back to a running back if I want a running back spot here. So this is where like knowing your opponents behind you, I think is valuable because I think if I had taken a running back here, I don't know that one of the wide receivers I want gets back to me. Whereas if I take the wide receiver first, given the running back allocations here, I think there's a decent chance a running back that I'm pretty comfortable with comes back to me. And it looks like that will be the case between Madison, Pierce, and Dobbins. You can see all the wide receivers go here. So probably you can see this person building out the Seattle stack here. Now, normally I would be taking Madison or Pierce here, but this is a Lamar team. I'm betting on the Ravens offense kind of being nuclear here. I'm going to take Dobbins a little bit ahead of ADP. Hope Dobbins is involved in the passing game. Hope Baltimore goes nuclear this year, and we get the little correlation. Now, running back quarterback correlation is not always the best, especially historically on Lamar Jackson teams. But for a seasonal contest, you're just betting on kind of the explosion of the Baltimore offense as a whole here. So that's why we go Dobbins over Madison or Pierce. Any other situation, no Lamar Jackson, I'm taking Madison or Pierce, and I'm doing it based on, like if I had Mixon here with a bye week of 7, 100% taking Madison over Pierce in that scenario. Another scenario where I had like Saquon Barkley there, I'm taking Pierce over Madison. Diversifying bye weeks on drafters, I think it's important to consider. Yeah, Ozzy notes last year Jefferson was wide receiver 1 and then just had his worst week of the season in week 17. That's the variance that's associated with some of those tournament stuff. I'm not sure if the winner on drafters last year had Justin Jefferson, but wouldn't be surprised if they did, and week 17 just didn't hurt them that much. That's the benefit of this style of contest. Kyle asks, thoughts on D-Hop, DeAndre Hopkins? ETR ranks are high in him, but Silva's very low. Been conflicted on drafting him in home leagues. Yeah, I have a lot of exposure to DeAndre Hopkins this year. We are well ahead of him on the ranks. He is my, let's see. He's my 10th highest exposure player this year at 15.5%. You can tell I draft by the ranks. I eat our own cooking, as they would say in the investment world. So I think in these situations, I've asked the projections team a lot because we're high on DeAndre Hopkins relative to the field. We're high on Treylon Burks relative to the field. And we're high on Chig Okonkwo relative to the field. And so I've asked the projections team a couple times, like what our inputs are on Tennessee as a passing offense, efficiency-wise, pass rate over expectation-wise. We have pretty conservative estimates on them all across. The reason we're high on all those guys is we don't perceive there to be much target competition beyond them. The Nick Westbrook-Akines, the Kyle Phillips, the running back room. Derrick Henry doesn't command a ton of targets. So we think the offense is going to be very concentrated within those three guys. And we think Ryan Tannehill's done enough that he can be efficient with those three guys. So I am ahead of market on all three of those guys this year. I have double-digit percentages on both Chig, Burks, on all three, Chig, Burks, and Hopkins. So I'm heavily invested here. I prefer taking Hopkins in the 5th over the 4th. Very hard to do that on drafters. He almost never lasts to the 5th round. It's almost always the 4th. So it's a little bit of an uncomfortable click for me on drafters. I have a lot more of my exposure on UD and DK. But I get it. The good sign, like older veteran wide receiver, shown a little bit of signs of decline, doesn't separate quite as much anymore. In a run-heavy first offense, a little bit concerning with young playmakers that are challenging for the target share. But DeAndre Hopkins came back last year and looked great in the final 9 games of the season after the suspension. Commanded a huge target share, had just great production. I mean, monster production. So hoping he doesn't fall off the edge cliff, but I get having some hesitation there. And I understand why the numbers like him. And I understand why Silva, who's, not as numbers oriented, a little bit more feel oriented, could have some concerns. I get both sides of it. I've chosen to lean into the numbers a little bit more, but tried to be cautious on where I'm taking him relative to our ranks. I'm trying to take him behind ADP or at ADP. In our ranks, his ADP is like right in line with our ranks on drafters. On the other sites, it's the ADP is a little bit after. So, know the site that you're on as well and where you can get the best prices on guys if you're drafting across sites during the best ball season. I think it's important. Okay, coming up again, round 7 here. Got a nice, an easy peasy build. Easy as 1, 2, 3. We've got 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers through this point. Zay Flowers goes in that 75 range. So, we're boxed out on Zay. Bateman's got an ADP of 92. So I got to get him with one of these 2 picks. He's not coming back to me if I want to get that stack. So now I have to make some kind of tough decisions. Where do I push to get him at 87? The results of me pushing that decision with the wide receivers room as it is now in terms of ADP, there's guys like QJ, Burks, Moore. He could easily get sniped here. I don't think there's as big of a difference. So I'm just going to take him here. It's well ahead of ADP, but I'm securing the stack and the options around him here. I don't think there's anybody that's screaming that I'm missing out on that I can't get somewhat similar value at 87. So I'm just locking in. I know it's well ahead of ADP. ADP would have suggested I can get him at 87 most of the time. I don't want to risk it though. I just want to lock in my stack partner with Lamar there. And some good names go. Pitts and Burks would have been names I absolutely would have considered there for sure. But I think you got to lock him in, get your stack partner and move on. Danny Dimes goes round 8 there. We got him round 9 last draft. So feeling pretty good about that. Now we're looking at the board. The wide receiver options are a little bit narrower. Quentin Johnson is one of those breakout types that you can go after, but we talked earlier about who could be this year's Josh Jacobs. Maybe it's Cam Akers. We're going to give him a shot at pick 87, round 8. I think that's pretty good value for where he usually goes. Gives us that third running back. Once again, a team that is probably going to be on the 5-ish, 6 at most running backs when you get 3 through the first 8 rounds. And we're going to have to build in bulk a little bit at the wide receiver and tight end positions. But with Lamar at quarterback, I'm probably just building solo. One quarterback, one additional quarterback, probably not going 3 with Lamar. Appreciate you all hanging in there. The numbers on the stream have been pretty consistent throughout. We've been concurrent right around 100 viewers. So appreciate you all hanging in and drafting with me and talking best ball, talking NFL season as we go into the second hour here in the second draft on Drafters. This will be the last draft. My voice will not be able to make it a third draft tonight. But yeah, appreciate you all hanging out with me, drafting with me, talking best ball. The QB run starts in round 8. Sometimes this happens closer to round 9, but you can see here Daniel Jones, Deshaun Watson, Anthony Richardson, Tua, all off the board. Quasi does land the double stack, doesn't mess around. Quasi doesn't mess around pushing it here. Now, it's interesting because Quasi was in a weird decision here where you look at the board, everybody after you's got a quarterback. Everybody after you's got a quarterback and a good quarterback. They got no reason to draft Tua. But you got to look at the same thing that I was looking at. Now, my 5 picks difference, I didn't see much of a difference. I could have easily just taken Akers there. Quasi's got a bigger difference in picks, right? It's 10 pick difference. So could Quasi have squeaked out some value here and maybe Tua gets back? Possibly. But it's a risk. Interested to hear if Quasi will share after his or her pick, who they would have taken if they had pushed it onto and then who they got. You can kind of see what the difference would have been. It's no guarantee though that you get to it. And sometimes when you've got that much invested at the top end, it makes sense to just lock it in. But occasionally if there's a big ADP faller here, I might roll the dice on Tua coming back to me and getting my hands on the big ADP faller in that scenario. Just looking here at how some teams are building. It's interesting in these drafts, you often see like runs of positions, like Colby Hornet here with 3 running backs in a row after going really wide receiver heavy after the Kelsey start. You often see that where it's like pockets in a row. Peter Overzet would refer to piss boys for the yellow, pissing yellow. Lots of yellow wide receivers in a row, but you see that from time to time. Quasi takes Brian Robinson there. So Quasi, if you have any idea who you would have taken here, it'd be interesting to note what the comparison could be. Like, what's the difference between who you could have taken here and Brian Robinson? When you're talking about like Rashad White, probably not that big of a difference, right? So lock into a. But if it was someone like, I don't know, like let's say DeAndre Swift was like falling in that area. Maybe people don't, maybe people consider Swift and White similar. I think there's probably a bigger ceiling on Swift and the better offense, but maybe that's a different decision there. Quasi said 50-50 decision, but don't have a lot of the double stack. Yeah, just get it while you can get it. Not that often. For me here, I want to go back to building out some wide receiver upside. This is wide receiver upside for me. Could come with a lot of zeros. But there are scenarios. There are scenarios in the simulation. I don't know if we're in it. There's scenarios in the simulation that Kadarius Toney plays all 17 games and is like wide receiver 8 on the season. It's possible on the per game production we've seen from him in the past, now paired with Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't happen very often in the simulation. But we're not playing for outcomes that happen very often in these best ball tournaments. So Kadarius Toney there, pick 106 for me. A fairly straightforward click. And I got a lot of combination of floor ceiling with like Amon-Ra, Godwin. I think those are really good floor plays, CD. So get a little bit of a pure ceiling play. There's no floor with Toney, right? But there's an awful lot of ceiling if things break right for Kadarius Toney. See where we're kicking around here on the way back. This is a heavily populated running back area. Just generally, this round 10 is a fertile running back zone. You can see round 9, round 10, Charbonnet, Dalvin Cook, Brian Robinson, Khalil Herbert, Antonio Gibson, all guys that go. Hodgins, 109. That is making sure you get your stack partner there. If anybody has any specific thoughts on that pick, you can email him at mattholden1231@gmail. It appears. AJ Dillon goes in front of me. So I once again have the opportunity to take more Jaylen Warren if I want. Or I could get a wide receiver 6. Can't stop, won't stop. One more Jaylen Warren. Just keep tapping it on the portfolio. He's gonna be a big part of my success this year if it happens. I've got 18% Jaylen Warren, my highest exposure player coming into today overall. Quasi noted, wanted to secure Herbert was on my radar, and I like Sky Moore, but the week 10 buy allowed me to give up on him. So what he's saying is that Quasi had all this invested in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, both by week 10s. So if you take Sky Moore here, that's 3 by week 10s of your first 5 receivers. You're putting a lot of pressure on the back end of your receiver room and a little bit of a limitation on drafting later in terms of where you can go. So understand the logic. I appreciate you sharing it, Quasi. I think it makes us all better talking through those situations. All right, back half of the draft. Home stretch. Not a lot of questions in the chat, so it's a good time, good reminder. Hit that QR code, baby. 2023 draft kit, rankings, tiers, late round targets, fades, and more. All the content you need to get you ready for your draft. Crush your league mates. And take home that sweet, sweet, sweet pride and prize money from your friends and family. Hit the QR code. Get the draft kit. Get an advantage over your opponents today. All right. So we've got the 1-4-5-0 build working. Again, 4 running backs through 10 rounds. Allows me to be a little bit running back light the rest of the way. You'll also notice the beautiful bye-week diversity we've got going on this team. 9, 13, 10, and 6 at the running back position. 9, 7, 5, 13, and 10 at the wide receiver position. No overlapping bye weeks just yet. Gives me a lot of flexibility on just playing the best plays, just choosing the hits, Looking at my queue and want to talk through some of these scenarios here. He just went, so I was going to touch on him with Tank Bigsby. If he had made it all the way back here, he would probably be at the top of my queue. But you already have Travis Etienne. You already kind of have a bet on Etienne being worth of the 39th overall pick. In the tournament formats, I can see some scenarios that it makes sense to have both of them, and maybe you ping pong weeks and get low exposure through that. But in this full season format, I'd probably be less inclined to pull the trigger on that type of draft capital investment from 2 running backs on the same team. When I have one that's a top 4 round pick, you're sort of nullifying your upside if you hit on Bigsby, So I would probably be a little bit cautious of that approach on a team like this. We can also see that we have an ADP faller at the quarterback position. We'll see if he keeps falling. Everybody's got their quarterback 1 here. But old Dak Prescott, 109 ADP. We're at 126. We've got CD. Could be an opportunity to take advantage of some falling ADP and just close out the quarterback position for good. It's a possibility for sure. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. In terms of the other positions, wide receiver, another position that I'd be looking to get into here. These are largely depth wide receivers. The breakout candidates, there goes Dak. Dak with the Anthony Richardson partner there. So no stack on Dak, but they get a little bit more solid, consistent, expected play to pair with Anthony Richardson, which I understand doing. Fine by me. I'm happy to. You see Aaron Rodgers go 129 here. He went into the 160s last draft. Aaron Rodgers drafter will not be taking Allen Lazard. I'll get Allen Lazard for a little bit of depth here. And this is just attacking the position by numbers. I don't love Alan Lazard. Don't think there's a great profile there. There's not a huge breakout potential by any means. But there is some value to just being on a good offense. And some of the other options that I had there would have been what Jim Money is probably trying to pull off here and execute, which is the Laporta Goff stack. I could have gone for a double stack there. That was a viable option as well. And I've chosen that plenty of times. I actually have a lot of Lamar paired with Goff. It's just the way the draft board works out. This one, I'm trying to push quarterback a little bit further in this draft. So we'll see what it ends up amounting to. But I'm going to try to push the quarterback decision, the second quarterback decision, a little bit further in this one and see where we go. But that Goff Laporta turn is kind of a popular one that people will get into there. And then at this turn, the 13-14, people will get into the Reed or Musgrave and Love. Those are common stack turns that people can do. Goff Laporta executed well there. Congrats to the investor there. I'm looking through at 135, kind of in an in-between range here. I think I'm going to take Kenny Gainwell for my 5th running back spot and maybe sew up the running back position. If I had landed Dak there, I might be going Gallup to double things up, but we'll get Kenny Gainwell in the mix here. Again, another player that I'm pretty high on. I have a lot cheaper Gainwell than this, so this is not my favorite price on Kenny Gainwell, but kind of want this to be a 5 or 6 running back team, and liked him with the 10th bye week over Elijah Mitchell with the 9th. My 10th bye week matching with my 3rd running back instead of my 1st running back. Mark asks, haven't heard much about John Mechie's training camp. What have you heard? The reports early on Mechie were pretty encouraging. I think Tank Dell sort of stole some of the thunder this year in Texans camp, and people have been really optimistic on him. So he's been the guy that people have been a little bit more focused on of late, but we haven't seen a lot of Mechie. Obviously, lost last year to I believe it was leukemia. So, recovered back this year. I think that's a wide receiver room that has a lot. Noah Brown and Robert Woods are going to start. Those guys are guys that are going to start early in the season, then fade off. So there's room for Mechie to perform. The challenge is that a lot of the receivers that they're like Mechie and Dell, Woods, they're all kind of better as slot receivers. Nico Collins is a very really good outside option for them, so I think he's pretty locked in. They seem to think Dell can play on the outside. Mechie can play the slot, which would be good for Mechie, I think. But Dell's really small, so I don't know if that'll work out. Sorry, Jake. No Kenny Gainwell for you at 144. Sorry. You get that number 1 pick, you don't get Gainwell with it. Building that Hurts stack, Hurts, Goddard, Gainwell. I've backdoored that a few times myself. It's a fun one to try to get in there. But Gainwell's another one of these guys, running backs on really high-end offenses. I try to get my exposure there if I can to the running back position, and didn't have anybody on this board here. You look around at the wide receivers like Reed. I thought there was a chance Reed would come back. His ADP is around where I'm at. I didn't really think this would happen, but there was the chance that if I take this running back, maybe it starts a little bit of a run, which has happened a little bit because people don't love the wide receivers in this range. So tricky spot of the draft, though, that pick. That was a trickier spot for sure. Coming back here at 154, 5 running backs. I'm pretty much out on running backs for a while. My 1 quarterback's Lamar. I can look at the wide receiver options to see if I have any stack partners. I do not. So I'm going to have to build any secondary stacks through the tight end position. So that's something to keep in mind while I'm drafting tight ends. You look at these teams who has tight ends available, where New Orleans has Juwan Johnson, Michael Mayer with Garoppolo as an option. Bryce Young has Hayden Hurst. I'm going to take the falling ADP value on Schultz here at 154. As I've alluded to in the first draft, I'm probably going to try to attack this with 4 tight ends most likely. So, I'll just take that value and kind of push the needle forward on the tight end position. Get one of the 4. It's a bye week 7, which I don't love pushing with the first tight end. I did that with Chig after Chig was my second tight end last draft after Higbee, because a lot of the other tight ends that I like are bye week 7. Irv, Jake Ferguson, Hayden Hurst, Tyler Conklin. They're all week 7 buys. So I don't love Schultz unless I get an extreme value, because I don't think he has like the nuclear ceiling that Chig has. So I don't take him quite as much. But 30 picks past ADP, I'll bite. I'll bite on a little bit of that. Getting into a little bit of the ugly wide receiver range here. I noted before that there's a stack candidate with Derek Carr and Juwan Johnson. I really like Juwan Johnson this year a lot, so I'm going to take him. It's also a sort of unique bye week at the tight end position at the 11th bye. You've got Henry and Gesicki there as other options that thin it out. But I don't think Derek Carr is going to make it all the way back, but I'm giving myself the out just in case he does. Obviously, Schultz, you got a stack partner with CJ Stroud as well. So I'm trying to take these tight ends that I have a secondary stack candidate with. I think it's important to try to build in that way. Could have done the same at the wide receiver position there with Samuel or Shark. They both have Hal and Young there. But was just a little bit more excited by the upside of Juwan Johnson relative to his position to the other wide receiver options there. So decided to go that route. Hoped to start a little bit of a tight end run. We'll see if that happens or not. But this is one of these drafts where I'm really, I'm really banking on the top end of this wide receiver core kind of carrying me here. Amon-Ra, CeeDee Lamb. And then I need one of Bateman or Tony to break out. Lazard's just kind of there to get me through. Godwin's solid. And yeah, we talked about how maybe he's got a little bit of that Amon-Ra kind of profile to him. But I need that upside to come from this section here. Godwin, Bateman, Tony. Ideally you hit on all 3 of those, right? That's how you compete for the overall prize. But to even have like a good showing with this team, you need 2 of these guys to come through. Got the running back depth, got the elite quarterback option. I'm going to build out the tight end bulk. So we'll make that all work, but going to need that mid-tier wide receiver breakthrough. And that's really where a lot of best ball teams are won. Naked Sam Howell. There's some groans about Naked Sam Howell being taken. It's tough. Tough, Quasi. Although I don't know if you're getting Sam all the way back to 174. These days, Sam Howell has a little rocket ship attached to him, so a little bit tougher to get him. You might have had a better chance at Samuel coming all the way back there, but even that's kind of tough. And you could have pulled the trigger on Sam Howell there, and then you could have backdoored it with Cole Turner or Logan Thomas, your tight end du jour, if you are interested in those options. Trying to figure out what I want to do here. Devontae Parker was definitely an option on the table for me there. Dawson Knox was also an option on the table. Okay. I'm going to go with Rashid Shaheed here. Really efficient player last year. Has a unique bye week for me at the wide receiver position. One of the other options there, Hardman, is a bye week 7, and I've got Lazard. I've already got a little bit of a bet there, and I've got CD as a wide receiver with a bye week 7. So would start getting a little bit deeper into that bye week than I would naturally like. So some of the reasons that I decided to go Shaheed there, but really efficient player and limited opportunities. And, the big play potential doesn't hit quite as great on drafters where there's no bonuses for yardage and it's full PPR, but spike weeks can help during the course of the season. He's a player that I think can produce some spike weeks. So we end up there. And then looking through, let's take another shot at a breakout. Michael Wilson, another unique bye week, young player, upside profile. That's kind of what I'm looking for there at the wide receiver spot. And that gets me up to 8 wide receivers, which is a number that is like the baseline for me. I need at least 8 wide receivers in all these drafts on drafters. And, DraftKings, the 20-round drafts, FFPC. FFPC is a little different with the tight end premium stuff, but on the 20-round drafts, I'd really like 8 wide receivers. So this gives me another swing at upside. With a guy that is looking like he's going to walk into a starting role. Obviously, he was drafted a little bit earlier in the season, or undrafted in a lot of drafts. So a guy that you could have gotten pretty cheap exposure to, but a player that I'm going to take there because I don't love a lot of the other upside profiles on the board. And I got a unique bye week out of it as well. So. James noting Hunter and Mac as a backdoor stack. That is probably my most common backdoor stack of the year. I've Hunter Henry is my second highest exposure player, and Mac Jones is probably my third or fourth highest exposure quarterback. So I've hit that combo a number of times. All right, so 1 quarterback, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, 2 tight ends through 16 rounds. We just should peek at the quarterback situation. Just give it a little peek, because when you start pushing it this far in these drafts, you gotta keep an eye on where things are. Alligator Blood pushed the Stafford pick pretty far down around 16. Although I will note, Alligator Blood, 4th quarterback, when you invest a high round pick in Trevor Lawrence, I don't think I would have gone there. But Stafford, the pairing with Kupp is really good. He paired Carr with Olave, Russ with Sutton, Trevor Lawrence with Ingram. You got 4 quarterbacks stacked, but a lot of invested allocation in the quarterback position. You're going to really need a big season, probably from Evan Ingram at the tight end position, to kind of carry things there. Yeah, I get it, Scott, wanting to pair him with Kupp. I probably would have passed on that situation. I was actually considering Stafford with my last pick, because with Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua, there's some late stack options you can do at wide receiver, but I chose to try to take the wide receiver and move forward there. Now things are a little bit hairy for me here. We'll see what comes back, but not the cleanest for me with stack options. In the quarterback position. Not the cleanest. All right, guys. 4 picks left in the drafts tonight. If you guys have any other questions out there about the best ball season, preparing for your home league drafts, the start of NFL DFS, life, literally any other questions that you guys have for the last 15 minutes or so while we work through these last 4 draft picks, happy to answer. This is going to be dicey. Hmm. Hmm. All right. I'm going to take Kyler here. It's a stack partner with Michael Wilson, but I will note Kyler is a very tough play in this format. You're missing the first 4 games of the season. Beyond that, who knows? The good news is Lamar Jackson has a late bye week, so I can kind of push this decision a little bit. And drafting Kyler as my second quarterback does bring in the potential of a third quarterback drafted for me. Um, okay, we're going to take Isaiah Likely, get another stack partner with Lamar as our third tight end, a diversified third tight end bye week, and then we're going to have 2 more picks left. One of them ideally will be a tight end, and the other will be a miscellaneous position. Could be quarterback, could be wide receiver. Probably not going to be running back. Could be running back though. I've got a 5 running back room, and I really need ETN to kind of be an anchor, so it's a little bit questionable. But the ETN Dobbins Akers combo is probably okay enough to be 5. But yeah, it's a little bit tricky when Kyler's your second quarterback on this type of site because you just have to score points every week, and so you're not leaving much margin for error for Lamar. So it makes it for some more difficult decisions in terms of how to build. Matt asks, if Ertz doesn't play week 1, where do you have Trey McBride landing around in your tight end ranks? My guess. So I don't do the projection work for us on the NFL side. I do it on the NBA side. But my guess is that if Ertz was for sure out, Trey would probably be around tight end. I would guess probably around tight end like 18 or so. I think he's probably not going to be somebody that you're playing in your season long leagues or anything like that. He might be like a punt DFS type option. I'm optimistic on Trey. I've got a lot of Trey McBride this year. I think Arizona's not heading in a direction that would suggest they're going to play veterans a lot. And Trey McBride is a rookie they spent a lot of draft capital on last year to get. So I have a healthy dose of Trey McBride. So I'm not shy on investing in him, but my guess is it's easier to invest in him in best ball than it is in anything like DFS or seasonal that you're choosing to start him because you don't know that offense is going to be hard to rely on for production. But I think he's the type of player that I like to make bets on, that is a young player that has a relatively clear pathway to playing time that's very affordable in drafts at a position that doesn't have a ton of opportunity cost. So he's a guy I like investing in. We'll see what comes back around here, but McBride is near the top of the board and would be a stack candidate for a 4th tight end spot. So that's certainly in play as a tight end option. There's the Gesicki and maybe Mac Jones if Mac Jones lasts as an option for a 3rd quarterback. There's, if I want to get a 6th running back, well, there goes Zamir White, but Zamir White was there. Kareem Hunt was there as options. Leonard Fournette there is an option as well. Chris Evans, a little bit more on the upside train, especially for a PPR site. Although I think Chris Evans run up the draft boards into draftable territory is a little bit people getting ahead of themselves. A little bit, just in the sense that Trayvon Williams has been hurt for a while. He just returned to practice today, and I think Evans has clearly outplayed Chase Brown, but I don't know. So I'm going to take McBride as the 4th tight end candidate, stack partner with Kyler. So we got Kyler double stacked. We got Lamar double stacked now. Question is what I do with this last pick. But I think there's a chance that Chris Evans is really still competing with Travion Williams for that third down role, and it's not as sure as people think. So this position is really one that I think, my instincts are like, you might want to play it safe and just get Mac Jones. He's like your highest rated player on the board. But really, those instincts are the caution ones that I think I need to avoid. And I need to just play it as if Kyler returns like week 5, week 6, and Lamar's just crushing it anyway. So I'm going to take the dart thrower running back. I'll take a Chris Evans 20th round share there. So you go with a 2-6-8-4. Lamar and Kyler. Again, this is uncomfortable, but I think if you're trying to win stuff, you got to be uncomfortable at times. We've got Kyler double stacked. We've got Lamar double stacked. Kyler with Michael Wilson and Trey McBride. Lamar with Bateman. Actually, Lamar tripled. Dobbins, Bateman, likely. We've got, some wide receiver or some tight end depth to like piece scores together, and I think that's kind of necessary, especially if you have likely. Likely is the home run option if Mark Andrews gets hurt, right? Like that's the home run option that you're trying to hit on. But really going to need this middle of the wide receiver room. Godwin, Bateman, Tony. That's going to be the decider for me. They've got to hit. They've got to hit in a pretty decent sized way for this team to work out. And Chris Evans there, unique buy, also helped kind of push me in that decision. But my instincts were to take Mac Jones there and be like, oh, I feel safe and warm and comfy at the quarterback position because I know if Kyler takes a while or isn't really Kyler, I have an option. But when you're playing for a lot of money up top, you got to draft as if you're drafting right. And we're drafting as if Kyler's coming back. And if Kyler comes back and Kyler is what Kyler was before, then we've got 2 elite quarterbacks with a pretty limited cost base. And I just got to get Lamar to be good through the first 5-6 weeks before Kyler comes back. So yeah, that Quasi looking for thoughts on their builds. They go with Hill, Waddle, Gibbs, Hopkins, Waller, James Cook, Pittman, Tua. So the Tua double. Second quarterback is Tannehill, which they got with Chig, which I alluded to before. I'm a fan of. Durham Smythe as the third tight end. Little thin for me, but Waller and Chig are really, really strong. I get it with Tua trying to get the third stack partner. I don't know. Maybe I'm underrating Smythe this year, but I don't have much there. The running back room with Gibbs, Cook, young PPR backs, Brian Robinson, really solid role. Jamal Williams, pretty solid role, but a guy that I do not take a lot of, especially on a PPR site. Running back room needs Gibbs and Cook to carry you. If that happens, the wide receiver room is really good, and the quarterback stacked with 2 elite targets. So I see it for sure. Scott saying the 4 quarterback build, he's comfortable with it. Alligator blood here is Scott in chat. You see it there. Lawrence, Wilson, Carr, Stafford all stacked up. The running backs get a little bit thinned out at the end, so you need Jacobs mixing to carry things with CH and Ingram in a 5 running back build. That's a little tight. And then the 3 tight end build's a little tight. Everything's just a little bit tight when you go the 4 quarterbacks and all that draft capital 4 through the first 16. So you're going to need to hit on these late round picks. That's going to be kind of important because the depth is middled out a little bit when you get away from all that quarterback exposure in the early rounds. Kyle asks, should I trade Lamar Hall and Amari Cooper for Eckler, DK, and Deshaun Watson, 10-team PPR? Pretty even trade to me. I would prefer to stay put, though. I'm a big believer in Breece Hall this year. So there you go. All right, everybody. Appreciate you hanging with me. As a reminder, before we get out of here, QR code, get you right to the purchase page on DraftKit. DraftKit has everything you need: rankings, tiers, late round targets, fades, more. Draft calculator, our trade calculator, all sorts of things you need to make your draft season the best possible one you could be. So make sure to check us out over there, establishrun.com/subscribe for those of you who are unable to execute a QR code in the year of our Lord 2023. It's been fun drafting with you all. Check out the bonus, the promo code ETR on Drafters. That'll get you a 100% deposit bonus matched up to $100. So you deposit $100 on the site, you get $100 in bonus play. Promo code ETR at drafters.com. Appreciate them for hosting the streams tonight. Appreciate you all for competing against me. Good luck in the season. I'll see you out there in those best ball streets on the leaderboards. Take care, everybody.